The events take place in Paris, Ontario. Grant Anderson recalls his wife in her youth. Despite their advanced age, the Andersons enjoy an active lifestyle. They are used to doing everything together, even cooking dinner. Grant constantly makes his wife laugh and looks at her with the same loving gaze as many years ago. In the evening, Grant reads aloud to Fiona. She in turn feels that she is slowly losing her mind. Grant continues to reminisce. Once he and his wife were walking in the reserve. Fiona shared that sometimes she forgets what the color yellow means until she sees it. This prompts Fiona to think that even in forgetfulness, there is something beautiful. In the present, Grant knocked on the house. The door was opened by an elderly woman. In the past, Grant saw stickers on the kitchen cabinets. Fiona started forgetting everything, so she made reminders for herself. That evening, the Andersons were dining with their friends, and Fiona suddenly forgot what wine was. Now skiing alone, Fiona forgets what she was doing. Everything that once seemed important gradually disappears. Soon the spouses visited a doctor. Fiona could not answer most of the questions, looking disoriented. Now Fiona doesn't even remember when she and her husband moved into their house. It was 20 years ago when Grant left his teaching position at the university. Fiona realizes she needs help, so she wants to go for treatment at a specialized boarding house for treatment. In the present, Grant explained to Marion that his wife and her husband had formed a very close relationship. But Grant did not come here to complain at all. Sometime before this, Grant tried to dissuade Fiona from the idea of going to the boarding house. But Fiona remained firm in her opinion, understanding that Alzheimer's is an irreversible process. Once while skiing, Fiona got lost in the woods. Not knowing which way to go, she simply lay down in the snow. Grant watched out the window for a long time, waiting for his wife. Eventually he went out to search, but in the snow he found only the skis. Fiona wandered along the road, not understanding where she was going. Grant spent many hours searching for her, driving around the entire area. Finally, he found Fiona. She seemed to not understand how she got here. At home, Fiona returned to talking about the nursing home. Obviously, things would only get worse, so Grant was forced to agree with his wife. In the present, Marion invited Grant into the house. Her husband Aubrey is also ill with Alzheimer's, so Marion understands how difficult it is. Grant recalls how Fiona made the final decision. He asked her to hold off, but she no longer wants to wait. Later, Grant visited the boarding house, where elderly people with progressive Alzheimer's disease are cared for. The director, Madeleine Montpellier, gave him a brief tour. The patients are really well taken care of here. There are many activities, including puzzles, handicrafts and therapeutic exercise. It will have to wait until January before Madeleine can take in another patient. Madeleine also mentioned the mandatory rule: during the first month, phone calls and visits to patients are prohibited. This is necessary to ease the adaptation process. There was a small Christmas dinner at the boarding house. Looking at it, Grant feels sad. The thought of leaving his wife here for a month fills him with despair. It was that evening that Grant met Marion. Her husband is also ill, so Grant and Marion share similar feelings. At home, Grant told his wife that he won't be able to visit her for 30 days. Fiona hugged him, saying that compared to the 44 years they've lived together, a month is nothing. The spouses celebrated Christmas together, enjoying each other's company. After the holiday, Fiona packed her things. She's fully prepared for the next stage of her life. Grant was taking his wife to the same place. On the way, Fiona confessed that there are things she would like to forget but cannot. Many of Grant's female students sought his attention. Of course Fiona didn't like it, but she couldn't do anything about it. One of the students, Veronica, was particularly persistent. Eventually, after the professor's refusal, the girl voluntarily left the life. After that, the Andersons moved. When the journey came to an end, Grant, barely holding back his emotions, asked the wife not to leave. But Fiona is not backing down from her decision. Grant continues to plead with his wife to change her mind. Fiona in turn told the husband that nothing binds them anymore. He could just leave right now and forget about her. But Grant didn't do that, and Fiona is very grateful to him for it. Madeleine showed Fiona the boarding house in her new room. Fiona was satisfied with her new home, where she is to spend the last years of her life. Grant is still hoping his wife will give up on the idea. But Fiona knows it's for the best. Before leaving, Grant asked Nurse Christie for a private conversation. Grant just wants to ensure that his wife will be well taken care of here. He is bitter to realize that Fiona, being such a beautiful and energetic woman, will soon become like all these patients. Christie gave Grant her number, saying he could call at any time. Their conversation was interrupted by Madeline, who handed Grant a note from his wife. Fiona wants him to leave right away. Grant returned home alone, while Fiona got acquainted with other patients, including Aubrey. It was unbearable for Grant to be alone in the empty house. He and his wife always did everything together, but now that will never happen again. 44 years of marriage were left behind. In the present, Grant told Marion that a person often feels lonely when deprived of the opportunity to see someone they love. And although Grant regularly visits Fiona, it doesn't change anything. In the past, about to visit his wife at the boarding house for the first time, Grant spoke with Madeline on the phone. She warned that Fiona might not recognize him. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, Grant remembers how they were in their youth. The next morning, Grant arrived at the care facility with a bouquet of flowers. Fiona seemed to get along well with other patients, especially Aubrey. Fiona remembers her college years but has no recollection of her husband. Additionally, Fiona is convinced she met Aubrey many years ago and that they even went on a date. Grant didn't know how to react. He had envisioned the first meeting with his wife after a month of separation very differently. When Fiona rejoined her new friends, Grant left. He needed time to collect himself. Eventually, Grant returned to the boarding house. In the meantime, Fiona was spending time with Aubrey. Grant asked Christy if his wife at least understands who he is. The nurse replied that no one knows that. She advised Grant not to take it so personally. When Fiona decided to approach Grant again, Aubrey didn't like it. This caused Fiona to hurriedly return to the table. Later, Grant watched Fiona walk with Aubrey, carrying him in his wheelchair. After that, they watched television together. Grant comes here almost every day hoping that Fiona will remember him. But Fiona has become too close with Aubrey. He even drew her portrait. Only when Aubrey fell asleep did Fiona agree to talk to Grant alone. In her room, Grant saw many portraits drawn by Aubrey. Grant tried to evoke some memories in his wife, but in vain. Fiona said she needs to go to Aubrey because he probably woke up. Grant watches bitterly as his wife has a new love. Later, he asked Christy if relationships between patients can go too far. Christy said that it does happen. Sometimes Grant feels that Fiona has staged all this just to get away from him. Perhaps it's a sort of punishment for his affairs many years ago. Despite everything, Grant couldn't stand being alone at home for long. He returned to the boarding house time and again, watching how Fiona cares for Aubrey. Eventually, Grant couldn't bear it and approached Fiona, telling her they've been married for 45 years. This made Aubrey nervous, so Fiona calmed him down. When Grant finally managed to speak with Fiona alone, she asked him to back off. Fiona wonders why this unfamiliar man is so persistent. She genuinely wants to understand certain things. In the present, Grant asked Marion to consider returning Aubrey to the boarding house. However, Marion cannot agree to this. Her husband spent some time in the care facility, and it didn't go well for him. Grant is desperate because without Aubrey, his wife has fallen into depression, and he feels powerless to do anything about it. In the past, Grant told Christy about meeting his future wife. Back then, Fiona was full of life. But now it's all over, and it cannot be changed. Christy said that no one can take away his memories. Grant now treasures this more than anything else in the world. The next Christmas arrived. Grant observed from a distance. He learned to give his wife freedom, accepting the fact that she is in love with Aubrey. Grant spoke with a young girl who also came here to visit a relative. Grant truly felt relieved, realizing he's not the only one in this situation. Once, Grant arrived at the boarding house again, having learned that Fiona was sick. In the wife's room, Grant saw Aubrey sitting beside her, crying. Fiona called him my love. It was hard for Grant to watch. It turned out that Fiona wasn't actually ill. Madeleine explained that Audrey would soon be taken away by his wife. This separation would be very difficult for both him and Fiona. Or they could forget everything quickly. In the present, Marion directly stated her thoughts about the current situation. Marion is not willing to return her husband to the boarding house because if she pays for his stay there, she won't be able to keep the house. And that house is all she has left. Grant remembers how he came to his wife again. Fiona was broken after parting ways with Aubrey. Grant cautiously placed his hand on hers. Fiona continued crying. To cheer up his wife, Grant read aloud for her. However, Fiona sank deeper into melancholy. Once, Christy regretfully told Grant that Fiona's muscles were weakening. If things continued this way, the staff would have to give her crutches. Grant's main task now is to somehow cheer up Fiona. Otherwise, she faces inevitable deterioration. Grant took his wife for a walk. As they passed by the reserve where they used to stroll, Fiona couldn't recall anything. However, Fiona partially remembered her home, saying that the people living here now kept everything as it was. Fiona also said that everything here reminded her of him. When Grant asked him she meant, Fiona asked him to take her home. Later, Madeline explained to Grant that if a patient worsens, they are moved to the second floor. In that ward, they receive intensive care. Unexpectedly, Grant asked Madeline for Aubrey and his wife's address. Fiona will never be the same again, and Grant is forced to acknowledge this. While speaking with Marion, Grant learned that she temporarily placed her husband in the boarding house just to have a break. Now, having gained experience, she's ready to take care of him herself. Thanking Marion for her time, Grant left. He soon returned to the boarding house and asked Christy about the second floor so he would know what he was preparing for. The nurse said that people who had completely lost their memory lived there. Grant asked Christy personal questions for the first time. She's a single mother. The father of her children doesn't help her at all. Sometimes it's really hard for Christy, but she's more likely to be abandoned herself than to abandon someone else. Christy sees every day how lives end. Many people regret the years they've lived. Christy would like to know what Fiona thinks about it. In the evening, Grant received a voicemail from Marion, inviting him to a Veterans Day event on Saturday. Marion thought for a long time before calling Grant. She still doesn't know if she did the right thing. Grant continues to read aloud for his wife. She doesn't stop feeling sad about Aubrey, whom she considers her only love. Today Grant called Marion back and accepted her invitation. Dancing a slow dance with her, Grant thought about Fiona. Marion on the other hand thought that no one ever knows how their life will turn out. Fiona spends whole days looking at portraits drawn by Aubrey. Grant can't do anything to help her. As Fiona hasn't gotten out of bed for 2 weeks, Madeline intends to move her to the second floor. Grant and Marion are spending more and more time together. Grant still hopes that Marion will agree to send Aubrey to the boarding house for at least a day. Marion for her part expressed the idea that sometimes a person just needs to decide to be happy. Things never turn out the way we want them to anyway. This conversation turned to passion between Grant and Marion. Neither of them expected it to go this far. Today Fiona, who can no longer walk by herself, is being moved to the second floor. Grant has come to terms with it. Marion plans to sell the house and move. She has also allowed Grant to bring Aubrey to the boarding house. Before Fiona sees Aubrey, Grant wanted to have a private conversation with her. Grant was surprised to learn that Fiona remembers him reading aloud for her. But that's not the only thing Fiona remembered. Approaching the husband, she said he could have left and forgotten about her, but he didn't. Grant promised he would never do that. The spouses hugged, reminiscing about their happy past.